Every now and then we come to a point where, sort of like Stephen and Hannah, life has come to a place and you look from here and you see new things opening up. Life opens up. That we occasionally hit those places we wonder if it's going to shut down. But there are those points where you're on the verge and things are opening up. That's really good. That happens. You feel like it's happening at high school graduation. And after graduation, you wonder what happened. But whenever you get married, Deborah and I got married long ago. And I remember the morning, I was dead tired. I got about 3 hours sleep the night before. And I was leading music in a church in Los Angeles. And I led the worship services that morning. And I was tired. And we ran out and grabbed a bite real quick and then ran back for the wedding. We only had an hour to get everything done because another church was coming in to use the building. And I was standing up front waiting on Deborah to come down the aisle. I was so tired. And I saw her descend the steps in the back of the church and come down the aisle. And I looked at her and one tear trickled out of the corner of this eye. That's all I had the energy for. But I was excited because life was opening up. We're beginning a brand new and wonderful relationship. And who knew the adventures that would lie ahead? But life was opening up. And it's good whenever you stand at those moments. The good news about Jesus Christ actually opens up things for people. It opens up new life. Whenever you discover what Jesus Christ has done, who he is and what he's done, and you step forward into that, new life opens up. The Bible says it this way: we were therefore buried with him through baptism into death. Baptism reflects Jesus' death and resurrection. He died on a cross to pay the price for our rebellion against God. And then they put him in a grave, a tomb. And then on the third day, he came alive out of it. He didn't resuscitate. He came alive. And, wow. We reenact that whenever we're baptized. We've yielded our life to him. That's whenever things actually change. But in baptism, we're buried with him into death and then raised from the dead like he was. So we too may live a new life. It's a new life that opens up. Another verse, 1 Peter 1:23. For you have been born again. Well, a new baby, they're really precious. They're very vulnerable. But all the possibility that lies before them is just amazing. You, my friend, whether you're 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, or 80, you can be born again, or you were born again. It's a brand new life that's opening up. And it's on the verge of all kinds of good things. I'd like you to watch a video. This is about a man. He's a very, very sharp guy. And came from a good family background. But something happened when he met Jesus Christ. I'd like you to watch the video. It'll take a moment, but I think you'll find it very interesting.
I got my PhD.
The good news opens up brand new life for people. This is not something psychological that you work up in yourself. Sometimes people think that, but this is something that comes from the outside. And if it's happened to you, you understand this. Sometimes after you walk with the Lord for a while, you forget about it. But the difference between before and after is new life. He's a sharp guy. He was sharp before he committed his life to Christ. He had a good family background. And was trying to be a decent human like a lot of people. But Jesus Christ coming in is completely different. The good news opens up a brand new life. And more than that, it opens up good. It opens up good for actually several people. He died for all, that all those who live should no longer live for themselves, but for him who died for them and was raised again. Whenever you yield your life to Christ, you start trying to live for him. Now, you can get in a mess again. You can start getting into the frame of mind where everything's all about you again. But God's not calling you to that. God's calling you to live for him. As you do, life keeps on opening up. You live your life for the one who died for you. And when that happens, then here's a description of how life goes forward. Therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all people, especially those who belong to the family of believers. As we have opportunity during the day, during the week, opportunities come up, do good to people. Why? Well, if we're living for him. And he's the one who went about doing good. That's what was on his heart. Good opens up for people. Good opens up for those who accept Christ. You get a little sense of the flavor from this man's story. But good also opens up for people touched by them. We tend to see in the moment when we're thinking about sharing the gospel with someone, we tend to see sort of a crisis. You look beyond the crisis and see what can be. Good opens up for everyone who's touched by this person. Let me give you an example. Kara Baldwin is a member of our congregation. She and her kids are members here. And she had an interesting thing that happened as she was in college and then later went back to visit the same family. Listen to her story. I think you'll like this.
I attended college out of state. It's about 8 hours away, long way from home. Really didn't know anybody, and my church had an Adopt a Student program. So I filled out the application, and one morning in church, this man came down from the choir to pray. And as he prayed, I said, "Oh, Lord, I want to be a part of that house." And then backed up a little bit and said, "Please, God, would you let me be a part of that home?" And a couple weeks later, the woman who was matching up families and students came and said, "I'd like to introduce you to your host family," and led me over to this couple. And it was the guy that had prayed, and his name was John, his wife's name was Ida, and they invited me into their home. And I pretty much felt like I went from acquaintance to daughter status pretty quickly. They themselves had not been believers for very long. They were living in Florida before they came to where I was going to college. Had met this couple that befriended them and were starting a church. And John began going to these meetings that they were having at their house. And even though he and Edith had both grown up in a pretty formal church setting, they had never really heard the gospel. So this man, John, began to share the gospel with them. And over the course of time, through a series of events, they came to know the Lord, trusted him. John came to know the Lord first, and his wife, Edith, followed just a couple of weeks later. Fast forward several years, my husband's job led us to this area, and we began attending Hope. I went to the wedding of their youngest son, and when I was standing in the kitchen visiting with Edith, there was a picture on their refrigerator, and it was a couple that I knew here at Hope. Their names were John and Diane Wooster, and I said, "How do you know that couple?" And she said, "That's the man that led John to the Lord. That's how the couple that we befriended in Florida when we were living there." And I'm sure they had told me their names, but it just didn't register as a college student. So I felt like I had kind of come full circle with a couple here from Hope, leading this couple to the Lord, whom I came to know in college and just had a tremendous impact on my life. And then coming here to Hope and meeting that couple and seeing the work that they were doing, planting churches and discipling people. And I just had this sense of being part of a much bigger story, of being in the flow of blessing from John and Diane's work, leading John and Edith to the Lord, and the blessing they had been to my life. Just knowing them, coming to know them through the years has been a tremendous blessing.
We've used the image of the tapestry that God's weaving. Whenever people come to Christ, on the other side of that moment lies their contact with all kinds of people. And God opens up good through them. And it was fun in this situation. John and Diane Worcester were part of Hope in the early days, 1979, 1980. They planted a number of churches, and then were again a part of Hope in the mid-90s. They had finished planting a church in Russia, and were back in the States. They were with us for a while, and then went on to the West Coast again to do more planting. This couple came to Christ in Florida. Kara met them in another state, and they did good by her. So much so that she continued to be a part of their life. And then discovered, wow, the people I know are the ones who've touched them. And they touched her. As you open the door for people with the gospel, all kinds of good lies on the other side. For that person, and then for all the ones they'll touch. And actually, there's more. Some of you know Paul Harvey, you older ones. Years ago when we started Hope, we were going to have our first worship service in an apartment clubhouse on the west side of town. And we've been planning for this. We got there, and the radio was going. Too loud to have any kind of worship service there. We had reserved the area. And so how do we get this turned off? We finally were able to dig up a manager and discovered that the key to the radio closet had been lost 6 weeks before. And now Paul Harvey was on. He had a very characteristic voice. Actually, he's a good guy. He's a radio broadcaster for ABC. And did news and comments during the week. He was on the air for 56 years. Had about 24 million people a week in his audience. A good guy, Christian. And he had a characteristic statement that he used for one of his radio segments. And I'd like you to hear it because it applies here. This is quick.
Now, the rest of the story.
Those of you who are older may remember that voice and that pause. Now, the rest of the story. There's a rest of the story here. Not only does this open up good for the person and the people they touch, it can open up good for your own life in ways you never dreamed before. Let me take you to another story. We're having Video Sunday, by the way. This is a conversation between Teresa Boytz, who's a part of the congregation here. She became a Christ follower in 1978. She and her husband, Randy, who already was, became part of the congregation and have continued through the years and helped build the congregation here. And Teresa came to Christ because Diane Worcester, of the couple we already mentioned, and then Janet Hawkins met her at one of the parks, at one of their pools. So take a look at this story.
So what do you remember about that day, Teresa? We were wondering.
No, well, I was just here.
This is Teresa.
At work. Randy had started working full time, so I was just out here by myself swimming, and you guys approached me and came up to me and sat down and just got to talking and asking questions and about
didn't
me.
think it was weird?
No, I didn't. I don't remember.
That's Diane Worcester.
And it was comfortable. I remember it being comfortable. You were asking questions about me and Randy and where we came from and what we were doing, and just as just friends would do. Was it weird for you? Was it hard for you?
It was real weird for me. I was a pretty new Christian, and I had
That's
never
Janet.
done evangelism, and I was going through evangelism training. Diane and I both were in this class, but Diane was much more experienced, and so Diane and I were paired together, and it was June, it was hot, we both love water, let's go to the pool.
Part of the class said, find something that we enjoy doing and use it as a way to meet people.
Yeah.
Our friend Mindy calls it tangilism.
I remember us sitting in the car and praying and asking God to lead us to someone and really praying with confidence. And then we go in and try to strike up numerous conversations, both in the water and around the pool.
Just with different people around?
Yeah,
the
with-
pool? Uh-huh.
First
Yeah.
lady swam away.
And I think we were here a couple hours. It was quite a long time, and I was hot and tired. We decided, let's leave. And I remember thinking something like, well, God just didn't answer that prayer today. And
He didn't want you to think of that.
he didn't want me thinking that. He wasn't done.
Right.
So on our way out, this young lady is laying by herself, and Diane stopped to talk, and I think I was like, oh, it's time to go. Not sure about that, but you began the conversation, and I remember big eyes because I've never done evangelism before. And then what I remember is we invited you and Randy to go with me and my husband to Burgers Lake. Hope was having a service and fun at Burgers Lake Day.
So when we came, it was a very appealing, and everybody was very friendly and interested in us and asked a lot about us, and so it was easy. Y'all made it easy.
And then what happened? Do you remember after that?
Well, I think you guys kept inviting us back, and we were meeting at the Lions Club, and you just kept inviting us back, and just getting to know each other. I think that was the big thing, and for me, seeing your life, and seeing that lived out, and just enjoyed the friendships. And I gone to church all my life, but I realized I really hadn't made a personal commitment to Christ. And so just you sharing and your walk with God, and I made a commitment at that point. And
But God has really blessed me and John through our friendship with you and Randy. Such a blessing.
you guys have been such a blessing in our lives.
And I think it's stories like this that really encourage us to see that God has people all around us that are open to Him that we don't know, but if we'll take that first step, we can do exciting things. The whole direction of somebody's life can change.
Yeah.
It's pretty.
Janet mentioned how God had blessed them through the friendship. They've been friends, of course, these 40 years. Families done vacations together and stuff. But God opens up doors you never dreamed of. Randy, Teresa's husband, after Teresa came to Christ, got to know the Hawkins and the Worcesters. Friendship with the Hawkins kept on developing. The Lord led John to North Carolina to create a college ministry called Leadership Edge at Duke University that dealt with the top-level business students. And Randy will talk about that. Randy became an early board member and helped in the development of that ministry that is spread now to Harvard, Stanford, and other places, impacting high-level students who are going to make a lot of impact. But it opens up after Teresa comes to Christ. The rest of the story. Listen to Randy. He's reflecting on this. Teresa's husband.
Teresa and I had been married about a year when she came home from a day at the swimming pool, the Forest Park swimming pool. Said she had met a couple of women, Janet Hawkins and Diane Wooster, and that she had accepted an invitation to a picnic and to church on behalf of both of us. And I was initially wondering why she would think that was a good idea and why she would involve me in that. I found out later that John Hawkins, Janet's husband, was also thinking the same thing. Why is this a good idea and what did you get us into? But that was really the start of a relationship with John and Janet that's now 40 years. And it was really the point for Teresa, it was where she became a Christian through John and Janet and the small group here at Hope that they got us involved with. And for me, it was where as an adult, I figured out what does it mean to be a Christ follower. John, I think, first of all, was just a friend. And he was available. But he was also took the initiative with me to offer some Bible study on what it meant to be a Christian husband, which I desperately needed at the time, and Therese was grateful for also. And over the years, as we were in groups together, even when we weren't in groups together, continued to reach out, take an interest in me personally, continued to be very open and share what was going on in his life, and in a lot of ways helped set a pattern for me and model for me. Here's what a real relationship between two men can look like. After John and Janet had been here at Hope for a while, John was on staff as a college minister, and through a set of circumstances, felt like God was leading them to create a different kind of a college ministry, first at TCU, but then very quickly moving that out to Duke. And Leadership Edge really started as a different way to approach a secular campus, particularly some key campuses that were producing leaders here in the U.S. By providing a really valued service. In this case, leadership training, leadership development, in many contexts. But then using that as a platform then to engage with students that really were interested in seeing how does character-based, godly leadership, biblically based leadership really look, and how do I incorporate that not just into my job, but in my family, with my community, my church. And so it launched initially at Duke and is now at a number of campuses around the country, including locally here at SMU, out at Stanford, some activities at Harvard. So I got involved initially being the CPA on the initial board of directors for Leadership Edge, and was a part of the original discussions as he was talking about how it was formed, what it was going to do, and then was able to support John and Janet in that role over the 25 years that Leadership Edge has been around. We've now moved the accounting on to someone else who's contracting that. They're in North Carolina. They're living in Carolina now. And the last several years have stepped into the role of chairman of the board, and that God weaving those things together in a way that moves his kingdom forward, that supports a friend, that gives you a sense that we are doing what God's called us to do. And that's crossed all of life, but to be able to do that with a friend that you share so much history with is special too.
In the moment, as you're thinking about sharing the gospel with someone, or in Janet's case, ready to go home, you have no idea what lies on the other side of this. Not only are other people touched, but sometimes it comes back into your own life, and like Randy, later on helping John, whose wife helped lead Teresa to Christ, helping John develop this campus ministry on the East Coast that's now spread across the U.S. That kind of help comes out of that awkward moment years ago. God intends good for you and me. And he opens up good through people coming to know Christ. You and I have a unique privilege. We've been given keys. And I'd like to just wrap up with you quickly about this. Jesus said this, "I'll give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. And whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven." Binding and loosing is an expression that means locking or unlocking or closing or opening. We've been given keys. We are the kingdom custodians. The people of God are the kingdom custodians. Custodians have a key to things. And the old Jewish concept in the Old Testament and in the Jewish community for years was that the kingdom of God started on earth with Abraham, who's our spiritual forebear, as he began to follow God. Later, it was entrusted to Israel because they were given the law, and if you wanted to follow God, you want to submit to God the King, you did so through his law, and they had the law. By the time Jesus came, things had shifted. And though Israel still had the law, the leaders among the people were not really submitting to God. Jesus accused them. He said that they were refusing to enter the kingdom themselves. He said that they had locked up the kingdom. They had taken away the keys of knowledge. And they wouldn't go in themselves, and they wouldn't really give the insights that other people could go in. Everything was just in a system now. So, he gives the kingdom keys to Peter and his disciples. The keys are the insights that are needed. Peter, just at the moment, has declared, "You're the Son of the living God." And Jesus says, "I'm giving you guys the keys to the kingdom. You're now the custodians. And you have the insight. You have the knowledge that opens the door to heaven itself." So, we have the keys. The spiritual insight that Peter had about Christ, the spiritual insight the others had, we have. We admit people to the kingdom of God, or we don't. But we have the power. Christ built his church on Peter and those who shared the insight about him. He committed the same revelation that Peter had to us. And as custodians, we can pull out the key ring and open that door for people. We opened the door to the future. The disciples actually had already done this. He had sent them on a preaching tour to different areas of Israel. And he told them, whenever you go into a town, if people receive you, then peace will rest on that house. If they reject you, God's judgment will rest. They had already been admitting people to the kingdom. Well, you and I, we're the instruments, God's instruments of the kingdom. We help people and we do things, but we're also the custodians. We have the key that opens new life for people, good for those who will be touched by them, good for them, and then who knows, good for us in ways we never imagined. So, by sharing the good news of Christ with others, we open the door and we invite people into the kingdom. The way Jesus says it in the Living Bible, Living Translation, "I'll give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever doors you lock on earth will be locked in heaven. Whatever doors you open on earth shall be open in heaven." You, my friend, if you're a Christ follower, you have the key. If you're not yet a Christ follower, the door is open for you. Go through it. New life lies on the other side. We use the keys to open the door and invite people. And as people step through the door, the future opens up. You get a picture of it in the New Testament. There's a little guy named Zacchaeus. He's a short fellow, but rich. He was a tax collector. He had legal authority behind him to cheat people on their taxes and rake off some for himself. And he wanted to see Christ. He actually decided he was going to follow Christ. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector. He had others working for him and was wealthy. He finally decides he's going to follow Christ. Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, "Look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor. And if I've cheated anybody out of anything, I'll pay back 4 times the amount." And Jesus says, "Today salvation has come to this house, because this man too is the son of Abraham. He's entered the kingdom." How do you know it? He's going to start handling life like the Master himself does. Wow. For a man who's increasing in wealth and life is shutting down, life opens up. You hold the keys, my friend. Unlock the doors.